The air in Los Angeles buzzed with a kind of electricity only a major awards season could muster. It was February 2025, and the city was a kaleidoscope of flashing cameras, designer gowns, and whispered gossip. For weeks, the news had been dominated by heated debates, cultural divides, cancel culture, and the ever-present tension between free speech and public accountability. At 74, Al Pacino had seen it all, or so he thought. A Hollywood legend, he carried the weight of decades in the industry, his gravelly voice and piercing eyes still commanding respect. But tonight, at the annual gala hosted by a major late-night network, he was about to step into a storm he hadn't anticipated. The gala was held in a sprawling downtown venue, its glass walls reflecting the city's skyline. Inside, crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over tables draped in white linen. The scent of roasted lamb and expensive perfume mingled with a faint hum of anticipation. Guests, actors, producers, and media moguls chatted over clinking glasses, their laughter occasionally drowned out by the live jazz band in the corner. For older attendees, the event was a familiar ritual, a chance to reminisce about the industry's golden days while navigating its modern complexities. But beneath the polished surface, tension simmered. Recent headlines had stirred unease, accusations of elitism in Hollywood, debates over who got to speak and who got silenced. It was a topic that hit home for many over 55, who remembered a time when disagreements didn't end careers. Al sat at a table near the stage, his dark suit slightly rumpled, a glass of untouched bourbon in front of him. He'd agreed to present an award tonight, a nod to his enduring legacy. Across the room, Jimmy Kimmel, the 57-year-old host known for his quick wit and occasional controversy, was working the crowd, his grin as sharp as ever. Jimmy had built a career on balancing charm with provocation, but lately, his monologues had drawn ire from some who felt he punched down too often. Al, who rarely watched late-night TV, had heard the chatter, friends complaining about Jimmy's jabs at old Hollywood or out-of-touch stars. It hadn't bothered him much. He'd always believed in letting people speak, even if he disagreed. The trouble started just before AL's presentation. Backstage, in a cramped green room smelling of coffee and hairspray, a producer rushed toward Jimmy, her tablet glowing with notifications. "Jimmy, we've got a problem," she whispered, glancing nervously at Al, who was reviewing his notes nearby. "That joke you added about Al, it's trending already. People are saying it's ageist." Jimmy smirked, adjusting his tie. "Come on, it's a roast. He's Al Pacino. He can take it." The producer hesitated. "Just, maybe soften it? He's right there." Jimmy waved her off. "It's fine. He'll laugh." Al, catching the tail end of the exchange, raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He wasn't one for petty drama, but something about Jimmy's tone, cavalier, almost dismissive, stuck with him. He tucked his notes into his pocket and stepped toward the stage door, the murmur of the crowd growing louder. The gala's host, a rising comedian, introduced Al with a glowing tribute. A man who redefined acting, who brought us The Godfather, Scarface, the one and only Al Pacino. The room erupted in applause, and Al walked out, his gait deliberate, his smile understated. He scanned the audience, spotting familiar faces, directors he'd worked with, actors he'd mentored. Then his eyes landed on Jimmy, seated near the front, clapping with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. Al took the podium, his voice low but commanding. "Thank you. It's an honor to be here, celebrating storytellers, people who make us think, feel, argue." He paused, letting the words settle. "This industry's changed a lot since I started. Back then, we fought over scripts, not sound bites. But one thing hasn't changed: the power of a story to bring us together, even when we're tearing each other apart." The crowd nodded, some leaning forward. AL's words carried weight, a reminder of a time when Hollywood felt less fractured. He continued, presenting the award to a young director whose film tackled systemic racism, a choice that had sparked its own debates online. As the director accepted the award, Al stepped back, ready to return to his seat. That's when Jimmy took the stage for his segment. The lights dimmed, and a spotlight followed him as he launched into his routine. What a night, folks. Al Pacino, everybody give it up again. The crowd clapped, but Jimmy's tone shifted, his grin turning sly. I mean, AL's a legend, right? But let's be real, those speeches sound like my grandpa ranting about rotary phones. Back in my day, we had real movies. Come on, Al, it's 2025. Time to join the group chat. The room laughed, but it was uneven, some glancing at Al, who sat motionless, his face unreadable. Jimmy pressed on. Seriously, I saw Al backstage, looking like he's auditioning for Grumpy Old Men 3. Somebody get this guy a TikTok account. More laughter, but now it was tinged with discomfort. At a nearby table, a veteran actress whispered to her husband, "That's too far." A producer in the back shook his head, muttering about kids these days. For the over 55 crowd, the jab hit a nerve, not just about Al, but about a culture that seemed to mock their values, their contributions. Backstage, the producer who'd warned Jimmy winced, checking her phone as hashtag spiked. Hashtag Jimmy Kimmel roast. Hashtag ageism in Hollywood. Al, still in his seat, felt the eyes of the room on him. He'd heard worse in his career, critics calling him washed up, tabloids twisting his words. But this felt different. It wasn't just a joke, it was a dismissal, a signal that his time, his voice, didn't matter. As Jimmy wrapped up, Al leaned toward his tablemate, a longtime friend and cinematographer named Rosa. "You think that's clever," he murmured, his voice barely audible over the applause. Rosa frowned. "He's fishing for clicks. I'll ignore it." But Al didn't look convinced. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, his eyes, those eyes that had stared down Michael Corleone's enemies, flashed with something fierce. He wasn't angry, not exactly. It was deeper, a resolve, a refusal to be reduced to a punchline. The gala continued, but the mood had shifted. During a break, Al slipped outside to the venue's rooftop terrace, needing air. The city sprawled below, a grid of lights pulsing like a heartbeat. The night was cool, carrying the faint smell of exhaust and jasmine from a nearby garden. He leaned against the railing, replaying Jimmy's words, the crowd's laughter. At 74, he wasn't naive. He knew the game had changed. Social media amplified every misstep, turned nuance into noise. But he also knew something Jimmy didn't: the power of standing your ground, not with fists or shouts, but with truth. Inside, Jimmy was cornered by a reporter from an entertainment blog. "Jimmy, people are calling your Pacino joke ageist. Any comment?" He chuckled, brushing it off. "It's comedy. If AL's upset, he can tell me himself. I'm right here." The reporter pressed. "You sure he's not upset?" He left the room. Jimmy's smile faltered, just for a second. "He's fine. It's Al Pacino." But Al wasn't fine, not in the way Jimmy assumed. Back on the terrace, he pulled out his phone, scrolling through messages from friends. "You okay?" "Jimmy's out of line." One text, from a director he'd worked with in the 80s, read, "This is bigger than you. How people are tired of being mocked for existing." Al pocketed the phone, his mind racing. He could ignore it, let the moment fade like so many others. Or he could do something that didn't just defend himself, but spoke to everyone who felt erased by a culture racing too fast to listen. He thought of his roles, the characters who faced impossible odds. Sonny in Dog Day Afternoon, fighting for love and justice. Tony Montana, flawed but fearless. None of them would have walked away. The terrace door swung open, and Rosa stepped out, her silver hair catching the light. "You're not going to let this slide, are you?" she asked, reading his face. AL's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "I don't yell anymore, Rosa. But I'm not done talking." She nodded, understanding. "What's the play?" He looked out at the city, his voice steady. "I'm going to talk to him. Not for me, for everyone who's sick of this noise." Back inside, the gala was winding down, but the tension lingered. Jimmy, now mingling with guests, caught sight of Al re-entering the room. Their eyes met across the crowd, and for a moment, the air seemed to crackle. Al didn't glare or gesture. He just held Jimmy's gaze, calm but unyielding, like a man who'd seen every storm and knew how to weather this one. What happened next would ripple far beyond that night, a confrontation that no one, least of all Jimmy, saw coming. The gala's final notes of jazz faded, and the crowd began to thin, their voices a low hum as they spilled into the Los Angeles night. Al Pacino stood near the bar, a fresh glass of water in hand, the bourbon long abandoned. The rooftop moment had steadied him, but his mind was still churning. Jimmy Kimmel's joke wasn't just a jab, it was a symptom, a sign of a deeper rift. Not just in Hollywood, but everywhere. The quick dismissals, the rush to score points instead of understand. At 74, Al had no patience for games, but he wasn't here to throw punches either. He wanted something else, connection, maybe even change. Inside, the venue felt smaller now, the chandeliers dimmer as staff cleared tables. The air carried a mix of spilled wine and lingering tension. Jimmy was still mingling, his laugh cutting through the chatter as he posed for a selfie with a young actress. Al watched him, not with anger, but with curiosity. He'd met guys like Jimmy before, sharp, ambitious, always chasing the next laugh. But there was something restless in Jimmy's eyes tonight, a flicker Al recognized from his own younger days, the need to prove you belonged. Rosa, Al's friend, lingered nearby, sipping a martini. "You sure about this, Al?" she asked, her voice low. "He's not worth your time." "He's not the point," Al replied, his gaze steady. "It's what he represents. People don't listen anymore, Rosa. They just shout." She tilted her head, studying him. "And you think you can fix that in one night?" Al's lips curved, a hint of his old Godfather intensity. "I don't need to fix it. I just need to start." He set his glass down and moved toward Jimmy, weaving through the crowd with the quiet purpose of a man who'd faced bigger battles. The room seemed to sense it, conversations hushed, heads turned. Jimmy, mid-story with a group of producers, caught Al's approach and froze, his grin faltering. "Hey, Al." Jimmy called, his voice too bright. "Great speech up there. Real. Nostalgic." The producers chuckled, but it was nervous, their eyes darting between the two men. Al stopped a few feet away, hands in his pockets, his posture relaxed, but his presence towering. "Jimmy," Al said, his voice low, deliberate. "Got a minute?" The room felt like it held its breath. Jimmy blinked, recovering quickly. "Sure, man. What's up? You didn't like the joke." He laughed, but it was thin as shield. Al didn't smile. "It's not about the joke. It's about what's behind it. You got something to say it to me. Not the room." Jimmy's grin faded. He glanced at the producers, who were already edging away, sensing a storm. "Look, Al, it's just comedy. No harm meant. You know how it is." "I know how it was," Al said, his eyes locking onto Jimmy's. "Back when we could disagree without tearing each other down. You think that jab was funny? Fine. But it's not just me you're hitting. It's everyone who's been told they don't matter anymore." The words landed like a quiet thunderclap. A few guests nearby paused, their phones discreetly angled to catch the exchange. Jimmy shifted, his charm cracking. "Come on, Al, don't make this a thing. It's a gala, not a debate." "Then why's it feel like one?" Al asked, his voice calm but unyielding. "You're not dumb, Jimmy. You know what's out there, people fighting over every word, every idea. You want to add to that noise, or you want to cut through it." Jimmy opened his mouth, then closed it, caught off guard. For the first time that night, he looked unsure, his usual quips failing him. The crowd around them was silent now, the clink of glasses distant. Al didn't press, didn't raise his voice. He just stood there, waiting, giving Jimmy space to respond, or not. Finally, Jimmy rubbed the back of his neck, his voice quieter. "All right, maybe I went too far. But it's my job, you know? Keep things light, keep people watching." Al nodded, considering this. "I get it. But light doesn't mean cheap. You've got a platform, Jimmy. People listen to you. What are you saying with it?" The question hung in the air, heavy with possibility. Jimmy looked away, his eyes scanning the room as if searching for an escape. But then he met Al's gaze again, and something shifted, a spark of recognition, maybe even respect. Before Jimmy could answer, a woman in her 60s approached, her silver hair swept into an elegant bun. Al recognized her, Lillian, a retired screenwriter who'd penned some of the 80s' sharpest dramas. She'd been watching from a nearby table, her expression unreadable until now. "Mind if I jump in?" Lillian asked, her voice warm but firm. She didn't wait for permission. "Jimmy, I laughed at your joke. But Al's right, it stings. Not because I'm sensitive, but because it's part of a pattern. You poke at us, the old guard, like we're relics. But we're still here, still creating. Why not lift us up instead of knocking us down?" Jimmy blinked, clearly unprepared for this. I wasn't trying to knock anyone down, Lillian. It's just the game now. You gotta keep up." Lillian smiled, but it was sharp. "The game's only what we make it. You're good at this, Jimmy, better than most. But keeping up doesn't mean leaving people behind." The crowd murmured, some nodding, others whispering. Al watched Jimmy closely, seeing the conflict play out on his face, defensiveness warring with something softer, maybe guilt. It wasn't a victory, not yet. But it was a crack, a moment where the noise of the gala gave way to something real. Al spoke again, his voice softer now. "I'm not asking you to change who you are, Jimmy. I'm asking you to think about who's listening. Not just tonight, but every night. You've got a gift. Use it to build something, not burn it down." Jimmy didn't respond right away. He looked at Al, then Lillian, then the crowd, which had grown to include a mix of ages, veterans and newcomers alike, all watching, waiting. The air felt charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. Finally, he gave a small nod, almost imperceptible. "I hear you," he said, his voice low. "I'll think about it." Al held his gaze a moment longer, then nodded back. "That's all I'm asking." He turned to walk away, the crowd parting slightly as he moved toward Rosa, who was watching with a proud smirk. Lillian stayed with Jimmy, her voice low as she continued the conversation, her words too soft to catch. The gala resumed its rhythm, laughter, clinking glasses, but it felt different now, like a room exhaling after holding its breath too long. Outside, the city pulsed on, oblivious to the quiet revolution inside. Al stepped onto the terrace again, the cool air brushing his face. The jasmine scent was stronger now, mingling with the distant hum of traffic. He leaned against the railing, his mind replaying the exchange. It wasn't a showdown, not like the movies. No one had won or lost. But something had shifted, a small ripple that might grow or might not. Rosa joined him, her martini glass empty. "You think he got it?" she asked. Al shrugged, his eyes on the skyline. "Maybe. Maybe not. But he heard it. That's a start." She chuckled. "You're still a damn idealist, you know that?" He smiled, a real one this time. "Somebody's gotta be." Below, the city glittered, a mess of light and shadow. Al thought of the people in that room, the ones watching at home, the ones who'd feel seen or unseen by what happened next. He didn't know if Jimmy would change, or if the industry would, or if the world would keep spinning in its same angry circles. But for the first time that night, he felt a flicker of hope, not loud, not certain, but enough to carry him forward. The terrace door opened again, and a young assistant poked her head out. "Mr. Pacino? They're asking for you, inside. Something about a toast." Al nodded, straightening up. "Be right there." As he walked back into the gala, the noise of the crowd washed over him, laughter, arguments, dreams, all tangled together. He didn't have all the answers, but he had his voice, and he'd use it, one conversation at a time. The Los Angeles Gala had dwindled to its final moments, the once crowded venue now a patchwork of half-empty tables and lingering conversations. The air was thick with the residue of wine, perfume, and unspoken thoughts. Al Pacino stood near the edge of the room, his hands in his pockets, watching as the last guests exchanged goodbyes. The confrontation with Jimmy Kimmel hadn't erupted into the spectacle some might have expected. No raised voices, no viral meltdown. Instead, it had been a quiet collision, a moment of raw honesty that left the room buzzing with something new. For Al at 74, it wasn't about winning. It was about planting a seed, however small, in a world that seemed to thrive on division. The jazz band had packed up, leaving only the soft clatter of staff stacking plates and the distant hum of the city beyond the glass walls. The night felt heavy, not with defeat, but with possibility. Al's exchange with Jimmy, calm, direct, unflinching, had rippled through the crowd. He'd seen it in their faces, the older producers nodding thoughtfully, the younger actors whispering with a mix of awe and unease. Even Lillian, the retired screenwriter, had stayed by Jimmy's side after Al stepped away, her voice steady as she pressed him to think beyond the laugh track. It wasn't a resolution, but it was a start. Jimmy, now alone at a table near the bar, swirled a glass of whiskey, his usual polish softened by the night's wait. He hadn't spoken much since their talk, but his eyes kept drifting to Al, like a man wrestling with a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. Al noticed, but didn't approach. He'd said his piece. The rest was up to Jimmy, or maybe the room, or the millions in the Hollywood studio was thick with anticipation, blogs, and the kind that buzzed like static. The thought didn't thrill him, but it was late October 2024, he'd spent decades and the Jimmy Kimmel Live. Set this was under harsh another scene. Its polished stage is stark ever the loyal shadow to the gritty undercurrents, her swirling backstage, catching the audience, dim light. A mix of tourists and locals, clapped rhythmically, she said, their laughter canned and predictable. Mischief. But tonight Twitter's already losing its mind. Word had spread, Joe Pacino schools Kimmel, the legendary actor known for his explosive roles and no-nonsense shaking his head. Was the guest. I didn't school anybody. At 81, I just he was a rare sight on late-night TV. Well, talking and his appearance art had these sparked days, whispers said, of something big. Nudging his arm. For the over, you gave them something to chew on. Many of whom had grown up quoting Goodfellas and Casino. He didn't argue. This was a moment of nostalgia. He let his gaze wander with curiosity, taking in the details wasn't here to promote a new film. The so why coffee stain on a tablecloth. The green room smelled faintly of coffee blurred and hair windows. Like Joe Pesci sat on a leather couch, his small frame coiled in a night that felt larger than itself. He thought of his characters, Sonny, Michael, Tony, men who fought, broke, or burned. None of them would have handled this the way he had, with patience instead of fire. Maybe that was age, or maybe it was just him, finally learning what mattered. A young woman approached, her press badge dangling from a lanyard. She was from one of the entertainment sites, her phone already recording. Mr. Pacino, can I get a quick word? People are calling tonight a turning point. What do you think? Al considered her, his eyes gentle but sharp. A turning point. He paused, letting the words settle. I don't know about that. I just said what I felt. If it makes someone think, that's enough for me. She pressed, eager. And Jimmy? Do you think he'll change his approach? Al's lips twitched, not quite a smile. That's his call. I'm not his keeper. The reporter nodded, scribbling furiously, but Al was already turning away, done with the spotlight. He didn't need headlines to validate him. What he needed, what he'd always needed, was to feel like his voice still carried weight, not just for himself, but for everyone who felt pushed aside. The over 55 crowd in the room, the ones who'd grown up with his films, had watched him tonight with a quiet pride. He'd seen it in their nods, their murmured damn right-s. They weren't just cheering for him. They were cheering for a world where experience still meant something. As the last guest drifted out, Jimmy stood, his jacket slung over one shoulder. He hesitated, then walked toward Al, who was now near the terrace door, the cool night air seeping in. The room was nearly empty, just a few staff sweeping up. For a moment, neither man spoke, the silence heavy, with everything unsaid. Al, Jimmy started, his voice softer than before. I didn't mean to. Make it personal. Al turned, meeting his eyes. I know. But it's always personal, Jimmy. Every word lands somewhere. Jimmy nodded, his usual bravado gone. I got defensive. Bad habit. But what you said about the platform, about building something, it stuck. I don't know what I'm going to do with it yet, but I'm listening. It wasn't an apology, not exactly, but it was close enough. Al studied him, seeing not the TV host but the man beneath, someone caught in the same machine they all were. Ratings, trends, the relentless churn of now. That's all anybody can do, Al said finally. Listen, then decide. Jimmy gave a small, almost shy smile. You're tougher than you look, you know that? Al chuckled, the sound low and warm. I've had practice. They didn't shake hands or linger. Jimmy nodded, then headed for the exit, his steps slower than usual, like he was carrying something new. Al watched him go, then stepped onto the terrace one last time. The city sprawled below, its lights flickering like stars against the dark. The air smelled of jasmine and asphalt, a mix of beauty and grit that felt like home. He leaned against the railing, his breath visible in the cool night, and let the moment sink in. He thought of the gala, the faces, the words. Not just Jimmy's, but Lillian's, Rosa's, even the young reporters. They were all part of it, this messy, fractured world that somehow kept turning. He didn't know if tonight would change anything big. Maybe Jimmy would tweak his jokes, or maybe he'd double down. Maybe the headlines would call Al a hero, or a has-been, or nothing at all. It didn't matter. What mattered was the feeling in his chest, not triumph, not relief, but a quiet certainty that he'd done what he could. Rosa's voice broke his reverie. You coming, old man? I need a burger, and you're buying. Al grinned, turning back to her. Only if you stop calling me old. No deal, she shot back, already heading for the door. He followed, the terrace empty behind him. The city hummed on oblivious, but Al felt lighter, like he'd shed something he hadn't known he was carrying. Tomorrow, the world would keep arguing, online, on air, in rooms like this one. But tonight, he'd spoken, and someone had listened. It wasn't everything, but it was enough. As he stepped into the elevator with Rosa, the doors closing on the night, Al caught his reflection in the polished metal. He looked tired, but his eyes were alive, burning with that same fire he'd carried since his first role. The story wasn't over, not his, not anyone's. And that, he knew, was the real victory.